Hello everyone, thank you for joining me again and welcome to any new viewers. This is To The Point English with Ben. I'm Ben, and in this video I'm going to recommend 5 podcasts for advanced English learners. Now these are not specifically English learning podcasts. No, these are general podcasts that I think will be particularly useful for people who are studying English. Now I often recommend listening to podcasts to my students. I think it's extremely beneficial. But there are so many, there are thousands and thousands of podcasts out there, it's very difficult to know where to start, which ones are the best ones to listen to. So that's why I decided to make this video. So let's get straight to it with number 1. And my first recommendation today is an absolute classic, which many of you probably already know about, but I think it's a really good resource. It's TED Talks. Now for those of you who don't know, TED Talks are kind of these informal presentations or lectures given by experts in their fields. So there could be psychologists, entrepreneurs, sometimes philosophers, sportsmen and women. So a wide range of different speakers. And also some famous speakers sometimes. For example, I think Bill Clinton, Stephen Hawking, Malala have all given TED Talks. But there are thousands and thousands of TED Talks available. But why do I think that TED Talks are particularly useful? Well, I think because, as I said, you have this wide range of different speakers. So that a lot of different accents, a lot of different ways of speaking. Speakers from the Anglosphere, so from the United States, Britain, Australia, Canada, but also from different parts of the world. So it's extremely useful to expose yourself to all these different accents. And also because of the different topics, getting all this input of different vocabulary, which can really help expand your vocabulary. Another advantage is that you have different lengths of TED Talks. You can have really short ones of about 3 minutes up to, I think, 1 hour TED Talks sometimes. Highly recommendable, TED Talks. That's my first recommendation. And my second recommendation is a little bit more controversial, but it's actually one of the most popular podcasts in the world, and it has been for a few years now. It's the Joe Rogan Experience. Some of you may have heard of Joe Rogan. He's an interesting guy. He's an expert on wrestling. He's been a comedian. He's a presenter, and he set up this podcast I think over 10 years ago, in which he interviews different guests and they talk about, again, a wide range of topics. Elon Musk, for example, is probably the most infamous guest on Joe Rogan. These are really long, in-depth conversations. Some people may not like them because he does have some controversial points of view, which are not to everybody's taste. But you don't have to agree with everything he says. I certainly don't. But I think the fact that they go very deeply into the topic, often for over 2 hours, because I think with these longer format podcasts, you're exercising a different skill. You're not just getting these bite-sized chunks of information. You're really learning to listen in depth for a longer period of time and maintain the concentration. But why not check it out? If you don't like it, you don't have to listen to it anymore. There are a lot more podcasts available, like the next one. Now, the next one is actually a BBC radio program, which is also made available in podcast format, and it's called Thinking Aloud. Now, this is a series of episodes about 30 minutes long, which look at social sciences. Now, that sounds boring, right? But it's not as boring as it sounds, because they cover areas such as, and this is just looking at the last few podcasts that have been released, freedom, love and romance, Afghanistan, and many more. There are hundreds of episodes available now, so you can just go through and find the ones that you find more interesting. Now, why do I think this podcast is particularly useful for English learners? Well, those of you who are studying for exams know that in the listening paper, you often have to listen to these types of interviews of people talking about a particular topic. And Thinking Aloud is very similar to the listening paper. I also think it's interesting, apart from anything else. I think you can learn in general, not just improve your English. So again, I recommend you go and check out an episode. If you like it, then subscribe and watch more. By the way, I should mention I'm not sponsored by any of these podcasts. I'm not affiliated to them in any way at all. These are just my own personal recommendations. So let's go on to the next one, number 4 now. And this one has a funny name. It's called Lexicon Valley. Now this is what they call a close examination of language. So it's presented by a guy called John McWhorter, who is a linguist. I think he's also a polyglot. He's basically a language expert. And each episode he analyzes a different area of language. Not necessarily the English language. Sometimes he talks about Russian, sometimes he talks about Chinese, sometimes the Romance languages. So it's not about learning English. He's not going to teach you English, but I think if you're learning a language, in your case English, I think it's very useful to understand the curiosities of the language. It's also interesting, of course, but I think it just helps your motivation if you can know a bit more about the structures of languages in general. So yeah, I find this podcast fascinating, and I think you will too, so check it out. And the last one, number 5, is a personal favorite of mine, and it's called The Infinite Monkey Cage. And this is also a BBC radio program which is made available in podcast format. And it's basically a science program, but it's also funny. It's presented by the astrophysicist Brian Cox, who is quite famous. You may have seen him presenting documentaries, BBC documentaries. And also the comedian Robin Ince, who's a very funny guy. Each episode they talk about a different topic, a science topic. It could be black holes or the origin of life. They talk about plants, all kinds of different subjects. And they have 3 or 4 different guests, again, experts on the topic. Usually one of the guests is actually not an expert, it's just a comedian who usually doesn't know too much about the topic, but is just there for laughs, basically. But yeah, again, I think it's really useful because they talk about a lot of different topics, again, different accents, and perhaps it's a little more entertaining than some of the others. It will keep you hooked. Again, just 30-minute episodes, so I highly recommend that if you just want a laugh and to learn something at the same time. So those are my recommendations, but what about yours? What podcast do you listen to? Maybe you can all share them in the comments and you can all get some recommendations from each other. Okay, thank you for joining me again, and I'll see you very soon for another video. Bye.